I used to believe that love, once given to a child, came back to you in old age like warm sunlight through a window. I was wrong. The day it all began was so ordinary it almost felt cruel. The sky was pale blue, and the house smelled of cinnamon and butter. I had been up since 6, kneading dough for sweet rolls because Emily loved them. Even at 30, too, she still smiled the same way she did at 8, when I baked her favorite things. I lived in their house, yes, but not as a freeloader. I paid for groceries, covered part of the utilities, watched my grandchildren after school, and kept the place running while they chased their careers. After my husband died, I sold our family home and gave most of the money to Emily and Daniel for the down payment on this one. I want you to be secure, I told her back then. How ironic those words would become. That afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual. His steps were heavy, determined. He walked into the kitchen, holding a leather folder tucked under his arm. "Mom," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a towel and turned off the oven. Emily followed behind him, quiet but tense. I noticed the way her fingers twisted together, the same nervous habit she had before asking for something she wasn't sure she deserved. Daniel placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. "It's about the business," he began. "Things are growing fast. Bigger contracts, bigger opportunities. But to take the next step, we need capital." I listened carefully. "There's a bank loan ready to go," he continued. "It's practically approved. I just need a co-signer." The word hung in the air. Co-signer, my chest tightened. He slid the papers toward me. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," he added. "Your family," that word used as leverage. I adjusted my glasses and began reading. The numbers made my stomach drop. It wasn't a modest loan, it was enormous. If something went wrong, the responsibility would fall entirely on whoever signed beside him. "On me, I don't understand," I said quietly. "Why can't the bank approve it without me?" "It's just protocol," Daniel replied quickly. "Temporary cash flow concerns. It's nothing serious, nothing serious. I had lived long enough to know that banks do not ask for nothing serious." Emily leaned forward. "Mom, this could change everything for us. The kids' future, our stability. Our stability. What about mine?" I thought of my late husband, Thomas, of the decades he spent working overtime, of the small savings account we built coin by coin. That money was supposed to carry me safely through the years I had left. If I signed and the business failed, I could lose everything. I looked up. "What happens if the business struggles?" I asked carefully. "It won't," Daniel said, his voice sharper now. "You don't believe in me." It wasn't about belief. It was about risk. "I believe that life is unpredictable," I answered. "Construction markets collapse, clients don't pay, lawsuits happen." Daniel's jaw tightened. Emily's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, impatience. "Mom," she said softly, but there was steel underneath. "You're living with us. We're all in this together." The words stung. I paid my share. I cooked. I cleaned. I raised her children while she worked late. But suddenly I felt like a dependent. "I'm retired," I said. "If something goes wrong, I can't recover. I won't be able to work my way out of debt." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So that's it?" he asked coldly. "After everything we've done for you, everything they'd done for me. The house I helped pay for, the child care I provided daily, the groceries I bought." My heart began to pound. "I'm grateful to live here," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but I will not sign something that could cost me my security." Silence filled the kitchen. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Emily stood up abruptly. "If you can't support us," she said, her voice trembling not with sadness but anger, "then don't expect to stay here long." The words hit harder than any slap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at her, searching for the little girl who once clung to my skirt on her first day of kindergarten. I saw only a woman calculating losses and gains. "Are you asking me to leave?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Daniel gathered the papers briskly. We just thought family would help family, he muttered, and there it was, the quiet accusation. I nodded slowly. I have helped family my entire life, I said, but I will not gamble my survival to prove my love. Emily crossed her arms. Then I guess we understand each other. Understand? No, we didn't. But I finally understood something else. I was no longer seen as a mother. I was an asset. That night I packed in silence. I folded my clothes carefully, placing them into 2 old suitcases Thomas and I had used decades ago. Each item carried a memory: birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, bedtime stories. Not once did Emily knock on my door. Not once did she say, "Mom, don't go." As I zipped the final suitcase, my hands trembled, not from weakness, but from realization. Love given freely can slowly turn into expectation. Expectation can turn into entitlement, and entitlement can turn into cruelty. Before dawn, I stood in the doorway of the house I had helped build. Emily was in the living room, awake. Watching, for a second, I hoped. She said nothing, so I opened the door and stepped into the cold morning air. The sky was gray, matching the ache in my chest. I didn't know where I would go yet. I didn't know how the next chapter of my life would unfold. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had lost a home, and in refusing that signature, I had broken my own heart. The first night in my new apartment was the longest night of my life. It was smaller than the kitchen I had just left behind. One narrow bedroom, a living space barely wide enough for a second-hand sofa, and a window that faced a brick wall instead of a garden. The radiator hissed like it was struggling to breathe, and the floor creaked under every step as if it were adjusting to my presence. I set my 2 suitcases down and stood in the center of the room. No family photos, no grandchildren's laughter, no familiar footsteps upstairs, just silence. For the first time in decades, I was alone. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands together to stop them from shaking. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry. I had walked out with dignity. I had held my head high. But strength has quiet moments when it collapses behind closed doors. The tears came without warning, not because I missed the house, but because I missed who I thought I was in it. For years I had been Mom, Grandma, the reliable one, the one who made everything softer, warmer, easier. Now I was just a woman in a rented room with 2 suitcases and a bruised heart. I lay down without unpacking. The ceiling above me was cracked in the corner, forming a jagged line that looked almost like a lightning bolt. How fitting, I thought. My mind replayed Emily's words over and over. Asterisk, then don't expect to stay here long. Asterisk, it wasn't just the threat that hurt. It was how easily she had said it, as if I were temporary, as if I had always been. The next morning, I woke to unfamiliar light filtering through thin curtains. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was. Then the memory returned, heavy and undeniable. I forced myself to get up. Grief, I had learned when Thomas died, can swallow you whole if you let it. The only way through it is movement. So I unpacked. I arranged my clothes neatly in the tiny closet. I placed Thomas's framed photograph on the bedside table. I set my teacup on the small kitchen counter. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that mattered more than I expected. The first week was quiet. No one called, not Emily, not Daniel, not even the grandchildren. That silence spoke louder than any argument. I walked to the nearby park every afternoon. I sat on a wooden bench and watched other families, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing, elderly couples holding hands. At first I felt invisible. Then I began to notice something else: freedom. No one needed dinner at 6. No laundry piled up waiting for me, no tension in the air. I could breathe without feeling like I was walking on glass. One afternoon, as I passed a small cafe on the corner, the smell of fresh coffee pulled me inside. Behind the counter stood a young man with tired eyes and flour dusted on his apron. "We're short on pastries today," he muttered to a coworker. I don't know what possessed me, but I spoke up. "I make a very good apple pie," I said. He looked at me skeptically. I returned the next morning with one. By noon it was gone. The following day he ordered 3 more. By the end of the week, he asked if I could supply pastries twice a week. People keep asking who baked them, he said with a grin. I told them it's a secret. For the first time in months, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not pride exactly, but purpose. My tiny kitchen transformed into something magical. Flour dusted the counters. Cinnamon filled the air. Butter melted under my careful hands. I worked slowly, precisely the way my mother had taught me decades ago. Each pie felt like proof that I still had value, proof that I wasn't disposable, proof that my worth wasn't tied to a signature on a bank document. Orders grew. The cafe owner began paying me more than I expected. Word spread to another bakery down the street. Soon I was baking 4 mornings a week. The extra income wasn't just helpful, it was empowering. I opened a separate savings account. My own, no shared access, no pressure, no expectations, just security. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights, loneliness crept in like cold air under a door. I would sit with a cup of tea and stare at my phone, wondering if Emily was thinking about me. If she regretted what she'd said, if she missed my cooking, my presence, my quiet support. Sometimes my finger hovered over her contact name. I never pressed call, because something inside me had shifted. I realized I had spent my entire life proving my love through sacrifice. Sacrifice of sleep, sacrifice of money, sacrifice of dreams. And when I finally refused one sacrifice, I was treated like an obstacle. The realization didn't make me bitter. It made me aware. Love should not require self-destruction. One afternoon, as I was delivering pastries, the cafe owner handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "A thank you," he said. "Your recipes are bringing customers back. I'd like to feature you Grandma Rose's kitchen." I laughed softly. Grandma Rose? For the first time since leaving, the word grandma didn't sting. It felt earned, respected. Weeks passed. Then one morning, as I balanced a tray of cooling pies on the counter, my phone buzzed. Emily's name lit up the screen. My heart stumbled. I stared at it for a long time before answering. Her voice sounded different, not angry, not impatient, tired. "Mom?" Just that one word, and I heard something underneath it. Fear. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. I had left their house feeling abandoned. But in choosing myself, I had found strength they never expected me to have. I wasn't the woman who had walked out with 2 suitcases anymore. I was rebuilding, and I was no longer afraid of standing alone. Alone did not mean broken. It meant free. When Emily called that morning, I knew before she spoke that something had gone wrong. A mother always knows. Her voice, once sharp with certainty, now trembled like thin glass under pressure. "Mom, are you busy?" I looked around my small kitchen. 3 apple pies cooled near the window. Dough rested beneath a towel. The radio hummed softly in the background. "I have time," I said. There was a long pause. Then the truth began to spill out. Daniel's biggest contract had collapsed. A developer backed out mid-project. Subcontractors demanded payment. A client filed a complaint over structural delays. The bank, the same bank that had wanted my signature, had frozen further credit. "They're reviewing everything," Emily whispered. "All the accounts, all the assets, all the assets." I closed my eyes briefly. If I had signed, my name would be on those documents too. "They're saying we miscalculated projected revenue," she continued. "There are penalties, late fees, lawyers involved." The confidence that once filled their kitchen had evaporated. "What about the loan?" I asked carefully. "We were approved without you," she admitted quietly. "But the interest rate is higher, and now we can't meet the payments." The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger this time, but realization. For weeks after I left, I had imagined them comfortable in that big house, relieved to be rid of me. I had pictured family dinners continuing without my chair at the table, but life had other plans. Debt collectors began calling daily, she told me. The mortgage company sent warnings. Daniel barely slept. They argued constantly. He says if you had just trusted him. She began, then stopped herself. If I had signed, I said gently, we would all be drowning together. She didn't argue, because deep down she knew it was true. Over the next few days, pieces of the story reached me through strained phone calls. Daniel's pride had turned to panic. He was selling equipment at a loss, borrowing from friends, negotiating extensions, but numbers don't bend easily. One evening, Emily showed up at my apartment without warning. I opened the door and barely recognized her. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped, hair unwashed and tied back carelessly. She looked older not by years but by regret. The same living room she once might have judged as too small now felt like neutral ground. She sat on my worn sofa and stared at her hands. We're 3 months behind, she finally said. The bank is threatening foreclosure if we don't restructure. I poured her tea, the way I had when she was sick as a child. And Daniel, I asked, he doesn't know what to do. Her voice cracked. He thought expansion meant success. He didn't prepare for failure. That sentence lingered in the room. He didn't prepare for failure, I had. That was the difference. Years of widowhood, budgeting, surviving. Rebuilding, they had taught me caution. Patience, the importance of protecting what little you have. Emily looked around my apartment slowly. You seem okay, she said, almost surprised. I am, I replied. It wasn't a boast. It was a fact. I had enough. I had peace. I had purpose. The cafe had increased my orders again. My savings were growing quietly, steadily. Security doesn't always come from large houses. Sometimes it comes from small, steady steps. A week later, Daniel called me directly for the first time since I left. His voice lacked its usual smoothness. Mom, he said, clearing his throat, I owe you an apology. The words sounded foreign coming from him. I let ambition blind me, he continued. I thought taking bigger risks made me strong. I didn't want to admit I needed safeguards. Safeguards. Like a cautious mother-in-law who refused to sign reckless documents. The bank is restructuring the loan, he went on. But they are demanding personal guarantees. If we fail again, we lose everything. Everything, the house. The cars, the life they had built on confidence and credit. He hesitated before saying the next words. I understand now why you said no. That acknowledgement hit deeper than anger ever could. The tables hadn't turned in cruelty. They had turned in clarity. The foreclosure notice arrived 2 weeks later. Emily brought it with her, hands shaking. Read letters across the top, final warning. She placed it on my small kitchen table, the same place where pies cooled and flour dusted the air. I never imagined we'd be here, she whispered. Neither had I. But life doesn't punish arrogance immediately. It waits, it allows you to believe you're untouchable, then it reminds you. I studied my daughter carefully. Gone was the woman who had told me not to expect to stay long. In her place was someone humbled by reality. I'm not angry. I told her quietly. She looked up, startled. I was hurt. I continued, but I'm not angry. Tears filled her eyes. We were wrong, she said. We treated you like a backup plan, like insurance. The honesty stung, but it also healed. For the first time, we were speaking without pride in the way. Outside my window, snow began to fall softly. The world looked gentler covered in white. I refused to sign because I wanted stability. I said, not just for me, for all of us. If I had signed, I wouldn't be able to help you now. Her breath caught help. That word carried new weight. They had once told me not to expect to stay. Now they were standing in my small apartment, uncertain where they would go next. The tables had turned, not with cruelty, but with consequence, and in that quiet shift of power, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel victorious, I felt steady, and for the first time since I walked out of their house, I understood something clearly. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply surviving long enough to be right. The knock came just after sunset. It wasn't loud or demanding like before. It was hesitant, almost fragile. I knew who it was before I opened the door. When I did, Emily stood there with the children beside her. Daniel was a step behind. his shoulders no longer squared with pride but bent with something heavier. Shame, the grandchildren rushed toward me first. "Grandma," they cried, wrapping their small arms around my waist. And just like that, whatever armor I had built around my heart cracked, but it did not break. I knelt down and held them tightly. They smelled like home. When I stood, my eyes met Emily's. "We lost the house," she said quietly. No drama. No excuses, just truth. Daniel stepped forward. "The foreclosure went through. We have a week before we have to vacate completely." The irony did not escape any of us. Months ago, I was the one who had been told not to expect to stay. Now they were the ones without a place to go. The universe has a way of balancing things without raising its voice. I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered my small apartment slowly, taking in the narrow hallway, the worn sofa, the modest kitchen table. The children whispered to each other, unsure. Emily's gaze lingered on the neatly stacked baking trays, the labeled jars of flour and sugar, the envelope of orders pinned to the corkboard. "You built all this?" she asked softly. "Yes, without their help, without their approval, without their permission." Daniel cleared his throat. "We were wrong," he said plainly, "about you, about everything." The words hung in the air, waiting to see if I would accept them. I sat down and motioned for them to do the same. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Emily reached for my hand. "I thought security came from taking risks," she said, "from growing bigger, faster. I didn't understand that stability is built slowly." I squeezed her fingers gently. "You confused confidence with invincibility," I said, "and you confused my caution with lack of support." Tears slipped down her face. "When you left," she whispered, "I was angry. I told myself you didn't believe in us, but when everything started falling apart, I realized you were the only one who saw clearly." Daniel nodded. "You protected yourself, and because you did, you're the only one standing. Standing, yes, not wealthy. Not powerful, but standing." He looked at me directly, truly directly, for the first time since the loan papers touched my kitchen table months ago. "We don't deserve your help," he admitted, "but we're asking anyway." There it was, not entitlement. Not manipulation, humility. I stood and walked to the window. Snow still covered the street outside, glowing under the lamplight. For months, I had rebuilt my life brick by brick. I had learned to enjoy my solitude, my independence, my quiet victories. Letting them back in could disturb that peace, but closing the door would harden my heart in a way I didn't want. Revenge had already happened, not because they suffered, but because I survived without them. I turned back to face them. "You can stay," I said calmly. Relief flooded their faces too quickly, so I lifted my hand. "But understand this, things will not be the way they were." They nodded immediately. "I will not be pressured," I continued. "I will not be threatened. I will not finance reckless decisions. If you stay here, you contribute, you rebuild responsibly, and you treat me with respect, not as a backup plan." Emily broke into quiet sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mom." Daniel's voice was steady but thick. "You have my word." I believed him. Not because he promised, but because life had already humbled him. The children, unaware of adult pride and financial collapse, were already exploring the apartment, laughing at how small the bedroom was compared to their old house. "It's cozy," my grandson declared. Cozy, I smiled. Over the next week, they moved in what little they had left. Boxes replaced open floor space. Air mattresses filled the living room. It was crowded, but it was honest. Daniel found temporary contract work, smaller jobs, steady pay. Emily took extra shifts and began budgeting carefully. For the first time, they tracked every dollar, and every evening we ate dinner together at my small table. No one rushed, no one argued. Something had shifted permanently. One night, as I washed dishes, Emily came up beside me. "Why did you let us come back?" she asked quietly. I dried my hands and looked at her reflection in the window. "Because love doesn't disappear," I said, "but it does evolve." She frowned slightly. "I left because I needed you to understand my value." I continued. If I had stayed after what you said, you would have never respected me again." Her eyes filled. "And now?" she asked. "Now," I said softly, "you know I can walk away. That changes everything." It did. Respect born from fear fades quickly. Respect born from consequence lasts. Months later, Daniel approached me with new business plans. Smaller, conservative, realistic. He didn't ask for my signature. He asked for my opinion. That was the difference. I reviewed the numbers, pointed out weaknesses, suggested safeguards. He listened, truly listened. The children adapted easily. They began helping me bake on weekends, proudly telling customers at the cafe, "That's our grandma." And each time they said it, it felt different than before, not because I had changed, but because I had chosen myself. One evening, as we all sat together in the cramped living room, Emily rested her head gently on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. "You were right," she murmured. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the greatest revenge was never about watching them fall. It was about standing firm when they expected me to bend. They once told me not to expect to stay. Now they understood something far more important. I didn't need their house to have a home. And they didn't need my signature to learn a lesson. They needed my absence and my strength. And when they begged me to come back, I didn't return to who I was before. I returned as someone they would never underestimate again.